The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, everyone.
We have a couple of great stories lined up for you tonight, and we're going to skip the housekeeping. So with that said, sit back, get comfy, and let's get into tonight's stories. Beth, where did your mind wander for this week?
Well, it's no secret for people who know me, but I am not a math whiz. I actually struggled with math from 5th grade all the way through college. But I am a history nerd, which I'm also sure is no secret to any of you. And I have a particular love for certain eras, but especially the Victorian age. So when I came across this story, I thought it was pretty cool. In 2013, Sarah Rivers Cofield, an archaeologist and antiques curator, bought a bronze-colored Victorian-era silk dress at an antique mall in Maine. It's a pretty cool dress. It's got, the ruffles and all the buttons and the bustle. But while she was examining the dress, she discovered a hidden pocket on the inside of the bustle, and inside the pocket was a wad of crumpled up paper. When she flattened it out, she could see that it was covered in rows and rows of writing. But the strings of words in these rows didn't make any sense. There were place names and numbers and random words all just strung together. According to ScienceAlert.com, the paper contained 24 lines of these senseless word phrases that said things like grub, wrongful, hug, duck, Fagin each, or Calgary, Cuba, unguard, confute, duck, Fagin, Egypt. Why would a paper covered in such nonsensical phrases be hidden inside a dress? Luckily, Rivers Cofield realized what she had, a message written in code. But what kind of message? Was the woman who wore the dress some sort of spy? Did she belong to a secret society? The possibilities for this coded message were endless and totally intriguing. She posted the code online, and for an entire decade, people tried to figure it out. Well, a University of Manitoba, Canada computer analyst named Wayne Chan has finally figured it out. According to a Washington Post article from January 7th, 2024, Chan knew that some industries during the Victorian era used codes when telegraphing information. It would keep the information private, or, for more practical reasons, telegrams were expensive. They charged by the letter. And by abbreviating words, people could share a lot more information for a lot less money. Chan started out by combing over 170 code books from the 1800s. These codes were commonly used by grocers and bankers and mining companies. But he couldn't find a match. By pure luck, and I'm sure extensive hours of poring over these books, he found a reference that proved fruitful. a U.S. Army code book from 1877. It turns out the U.S. Army Signal Corps and the U.S. Weather Bureau both used codes to telegraph daily weather reports. They'd created the code because they were trying to put together a national weather map, and telegram prices were super expensive. When Chan reached out to National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration librarians, he was able to trace the code to various weather stations, including ones in Texas, Indiana, Illinois, and Mississippi. This, in itself, is incredible, since these stations, plus others all across Canada and the U.S., were taking note of the weather and sending these telegrams multiple times a day. The bronze dress code matched ones that all occurred on the same date, May 27, 1888. The code itself was pretty simple once you got the hang of it. Each syllable of a word represented either a dew point, temperature, barometric pressure, precipitation, wind speed, or river height. I won't go into all the specifics, but it was a brilliant code that proved to be efficient and accurate. So, the wearer of the bronze dress was not a spy, unfortunately, or a member of a secret society. At least, the coded message doesn't say so. She was simply holding on to a weather report. But a mystery still remains, of course. Did she record the weather herself and send it via telegram? Or was she doing someone else a favor by sending it for them? And why would she then crumple it up and hide it inside her bustle? According to Chan, there were just 18 women recording weather data and sending it out via telegram during this time period. But the only clue in the dress itself was the name Bennington, which isn't any of these women's last names. There's some speculation that the owner of the bronze dress had been doing laundry, and when she found the paper in her husband's pocket, she squirreled it away for future use. The bronze dress coded message mystery is one of those things that would drive me totally batty, or it could. I'd want to know everything about this lady, like her name at the very least. And there's that frustration over knowing I probably never will know the answers. So that got me thinking about other coded messages out there, and I decided to focus on two. One that was broken, and one that, to this day, still hasn't been. In 1917, World War I had been raging in Europe for 3 years. Woodrow Wilson, America's 28th president, promised the U.S. that we wouldn't get involved. But then, on March 1st, 1917, Americans were shocked by the news bulletins. A coded message had been intercepted by British intelligence officers back in January. They felt that President Wilson and the American public needed to know the contents of the letter that was sent from Arthur Zimmermann, who was the German Secretary of Foreign Affairs, to the President of Mexico. The British code breakers were successful because they had two code books. One was a German naval code book that had been retrieved from the body of a drowned German sailor from the SMS Magdeburg. The other was a German diplomatic code that had been stolen from a diplomat's luggage. This telegram, which was entirely made up of 4-digit numbers that scrolled across an entire piece of paper, hid an astonishing proposal. According to archives.gov, it said in part, quote, "We intend to begin on the 1st of February unrestricted submarine warfare. We shall endeavor in spite of this to keep the United States of America neutral. In the event of this not succeeding, we make Mexico a proposal or alliance on the following basis. Make war together, make peace together, generous financial support, and an understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona." End quote. In other words, if the U.S. were to enter World War I, Germany wanted an alliance with Mexico, and in return, they'd help Mexico take back their land that was now Arizona, Texas, and New Mexico. Have you ever heard of this? The
No.
Zimmerman telegram?
No.
Me neither. The coded message went on to say that Zimmerman strongly urged the Mexican president to make friends with Japan and to act as an intermediary between Japan and Germany. The message ended with the promise that Germany's submarines were being deployed at any moment and that England was their target. According to the National World War I Museum and Memorial website, the real agenda behind Zimmerman's letter was to entice Mexico into joining forces with them so that the U.S. military would be slowed down by the diversion. When news first broke out about the Zimmerman telegram, a lot of people wondered if it was even legit or if it was a fake intended to incite the American people into supporting our entrance into World War I. Well, it turns out that in 1917, Zimmerman himself gave a speech saying exactly what his telegram had proposed. So, thankfully, the Brits who broke the code shared it with our government, and we were able to avoid an additional conflict with Mexico. Can you imagine?
It's crazy.
They were going to try to take back 3 states. On the flip side, a code that has yet to be broken exists in a pretty unlikely place, right outside the cafeteria of the CIA building in Langley, Virginia. It's actually a 12-foot-tall sculpture. It's made of curved copper embossed in Morse code. Pieces of strategically placed wood and granite obscure some of the sculpture from being photographed. It's divided into 4 sections, covered in 1,800 characters that make up 4 separate coded messages. These characters are punched all the way through the copper, so the surrounding buildings and trees can be seen through the holes. It was commissioned by the CIA and created by artist Jim Sanborn. Titled Kryptos, it was installed in 1990. Have you heard of Kryptos?
Yes, I have.
Okay. According to SmithsonianMag.com, Sanborn developed the code with help from a retired chairman of the CIA's Cryptographic Center. But only Sanborn and the then director of the CIA, William Webster, know what the sculpture says. Sanborn gave Webster an envelope that contained the keywords for decoding it, as well as the full text of all 4 messages. As early as 1991, Sanborn found himself the focus of curious codebreakers. He claimed that 2 men even tried to scale his apartment building in order to look through his windows for clues. Thankfully, most people flocked to the sculpture itself, taking photographs and examining it from all sides. One man apparently even copied the whole thing down on paper. The first 3 messages were decoded in 1998 by a man using that paper and pencil method, which is pretty darn impressive considering Sanborn purposely included spelling mistakes to throw off codebreakers. The codebreaker, a CIA physicist named David Stein, revealed his findings at a press conference in 1999. 250 people gathered to hear the results. Not long after, a computer scientist named Jim Gillogly also decoded it using a computer program. The first message says, quote, "Between subtle shading and the absence of light lies the nuance of eglusion," end quote. The second message reads, quote, "It was totally invisible. How's that possible? They used the Earth's magnetic field, X. The information was gathered and transmitted underground to an unknown location, X. Does Langley know about this? They should. It's buried out there somewhere, X. Who knows the exact location? Only WW. This was his last message, X. 38 degrees, 57 minutes, 6.5 seconds north. 77 degrees, 8 minutes, 44 seconds west. ID by Rose." Well, WW, of course, is former CIA Director William Webster. The third message says, quote, "With trembling hands, I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner, and then, widening the hole a little, I inserted the candle and peered in." End quote. Now that one is a direct reference to Howard Carter, who was the man who opened King Tut's tomb in 1922. However, there is some speculation that the decoded passages aren't actually decoded correctly, which throws a wrench into things. Plus, in 2013, NASA claimed that they had solved the first passage back in 1993, but that the information was only shared within the CIA. As you can probably tell, the three messages, so far, only lead to a bigger mystery, a bigger puzzle to be solved. They sound like one giant riddle. Leading to what, though? Until the fourth message is decoded, we won't know. And maybe even then, we won't know. The remaining section contains 97 or 98 characters, and over the years, Sanborn has offered some clues. The first came in 2010, when he revealed that the string of characters, numbers 64 through 69 of the 97-character sequence, which are NYPVTT, actually read Berlin, if properly decoded. In 2014, he revealed to the New York Times that the 70th to 74th characters, which read MZFPK, actually say clock. He also added that people should pay attention to that word, clock, and that there are several interesting ones in Berlin. Then, in 2020, he revealed 2 more clues for characters 22 through 34. When decrypted correctly, they should read northeast and east. Sanborn, who is 78 years old, has said that the answer to the code will be auctioned off after his death if no one can solve it before then. As of today, no one has. And that's what makes it so intriguing, because once somebody does, that's only half the riddle. Once all 4 messages are readable, there's still the mystery of where it all leads to. The code itself is fascinating to me, especially if the sections people have claimed to have already decoded are wrong. But it's the irony of where the Kryptos sculpture sits that really tickles me. Right out front of the CIA.
Yes, I've seen it. Not in person, but I've seen it on TV. I don't know if it was with William Shatner and his Unexplained series.
Oh.
Or perhaps it was another show, but they did a segment on it.
That's pretty cool. I think that's pretty awesome. Especially that he threw in spelling mistakes, like that eglusion word, which is not a real word.
Right.
Yeah. And then what does it all lead to? Once they figure out what the messages say, then you have to figure out what it actually all means.
Well, there are people out there right now working on it. So
I know.
Someday we might know.
I know. I just want to know the name of the woman who owned the bronze dress and why she stuffed the weather report in her bustle.
Yeah. At first I was thinking maybe it was something that, how siblings sometimes make up secret languages to talk between each other.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking maybe it was something like that. and got put in there, but...
Yeah, but why hang on to it? Like, what was so significant about that day that she hung on to it? Or was there nothing significant about the day? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, we'll be right back after this short break.
Hey, did you know? In August of 2018, beachgoers in Cornwall, England, came upon a strange sight. Dozens of creatures the size and shape of tennis balls lay strewn over the sand, and they looked exactly like, well, potatoes. These creatures, which are sometimes called sea potatoes, are actually sea urchins, and when they're alive, they're covered in short yellowish-brown spines. They like to burrow in seabeds and only come out for mating season. For some reason, that year's mating season was horribly interrupted, perhaps by a storm, and they washed up on shore instead. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back.
Yes, we are. So, where did your mind wander this week?
Well, imagine this. There's a storm brewing outside your house. The sky is that deep gunmetal gray, tinged with purple, and off in the distance, thunder rumbles. Maybe when you were a kid, you counted the seconds between the thunder and the lightning just to see how far away the center of the storm might be.
I still do that.
Yeah, I do it sometimes too.
Yeah.
And maybe if you're as old as we are, your mom or grandma or auntie chimed in with ridiculous-sounding warnings such as, "Don't you get in the bathtub during a storm. You don't want to electrocute yourself." Or, "Get off the telephone this instant. The lightning will travel up that phone wire and fry you." Or perhaps you remember this one. "You put your shoes on before you go outside in this weather. You'll get zapped going barefoot like that." And then there's always, "Get away from that window. Don't you know lightning could strike you?" Well, according to the CDC website, mom or grandma or auntie was 100% right. It is dangerous to submerge any part of your body in water during a lightning storm, even inside your house, and even if it's just doing dishes. It is dangerous to go barefoot outside during a storm, since rubber soles add a bit of protection between you and the ground. Concrete can conduct electricity way more than you'd think. So don't lay down on the patio or lean against a concrete wall. And when it came to old-timey landline phones, yes, lightning could travel along the telephone wires and fry your phone.
You know, that was one that my mom always used to tell us. And I remember one time my brother was on the phone when he was babysitting me, and there was a storm, and lightning hit the tree right outside our front door, like right in front of our house, and it scared the ever-loving shit out of him, and he dropped that phone so fast, I'm sure he thought that he was going to get fried.
Well, yeah, I remember all these old adages that my mom and grandmother would tell me, but I never paid, much attention to them.
Apparently we should have been, since the CDC says they're all true.
Well, when you're a kid, you're pretty much invincible.
Right.
And you have to see for yourself.
Right.
Well, what about the old adage, lightning never strikes in the same place twice?
Well, my mom used to say that one all the time, too.
Well, that one, although rare, is absolutely not true. And tonight, I'm going to talk about Roy Sullivan, the man who was struck by lightning 7 times. Now, being struck by lightning at all is quite unlikely. If a person lives to be about 80 years old, the chance of them being struck is about 1 in 10,000. The chances of being struck 7 times by lightning on 7 different occasions is 1 in 10 to the 28th power. In other words, if you add 28 zeros to it, those are your chances. And yet, that's exactly what happened to Roy Sullivan. Perhaps it had something to do with where he lived. Roy Cleveland Sullivan was born in 1912, and as an adult, he worked as a park ranger in the Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. When people hear about Roy, I think one of the things people wonder is if Virginia has a higher rate of lightning storms than other states. Apparently, it's not even in the top 10. Virginia has thunderstorms between 35 to 45 days out of the year. The majority of those days occur in the summer months, between June and August. That being said, in the 41 years between 1959 and 2000, 238 people were injured by lightning in Virginia, and 58 were killed. During that time period, a little over 13,000 people were injured nationwide by lightning, and a little over 3,200 people were killed. So yes, Virginia's numbers are a little high, but they pale in comparison to other states like Florida, where there were over 2,000 people struck by lightning in the last 50 years. But in the 35 years between 1942 and 1977, Roy suffered serious injuries from 7 separate lightning strikes. At least that's the final number that the Guinness Book of World Records allowed him. According to Roy, he was actually struck 8 times. Now, just to warn you, I'm going to get a bit graphic when I describe some of his injuries. Roy was born in February of 1912 in Greene County, Virginia. By 1936, he was employed as a park ranger at the Shenandoah National Park. People described him as a bearded and brawny, and he kind of looked like the actor Gene Hackman. Again, if you're our age, you know who that is. If you're not our age, that reference probably doesn't help you one bit. But basically, Roy was a pretty good-sized, tough-looking man, and he was used to the rugged terrain and various demands of park ranger life. Roy's encounters with lightning are pretty well documented, although according to grunge.com, his first experience was as a young boy. Roy claimed that when he was a child, he was helping his father cut down wheat out in the fields when lightning struck the scythe he was holding. I didn't really have any reason to doubt his story, especially since all of his run-ins with lightning as an adult are definitely documented. The first official strike happened in April of 1942, when Roy was 30 years old. Roy was at work, and when a powerful storm rolled in, he took shelter in a lookout tower. The tower was new, and it didn't have a lightning rod. As he stood there, the tower itself was struck 7 or 8 times. Roy said, quote, "Fire was jumping all over the place." Fearing for his safety, Roy thought his chances were better if he made a run for it. He only made it a few feet before lightning forked down from the sky and hit him directly in the right leg. According to a Washington Post article, the lightning traveled down his right leg, burning a half-inch strip along the way. It burned a hole right through the sole of his boot as it exited his body and took his big toenail with it. Blood spurted from his foot and drained out the hole in his right boot.
I can't even imagine how horrific that's got to feel, to be hit by lightning.
And I don't think you want to know.
No.
27 years later, in July of 1969, Roy was driving south along Skyline Drive. The day was humid and hot. As he approached more S-curves near mile marker 97, lightning hit 2 trees on the side of the road and deflected off those trees and incredibly entered the moving truck through an open window. As it passed through, it cooked his wristwatch, burned his eyebrows, and burned off all the hair on his head, not covered by his hat. The bolt of lightning knocked Roy unconscious, and the truck rolled towards a steep ditch before stopping just at its edge. 15 minutes later, Roy regained consciousness. After the lightning passed through the truck and Roy, it continued out the passenger side window and hit another tree across the road at the edge of the northbound lane. Just a year later, in July of 1970, Roy and his wife were living in a trailer on the western edge of the park at Sawmill Run. Since it was a relatively clear and sunny day, both of the Sullivans were out in the front yard. Roy was working in the garden. Suddenly, without any warning, a bolt of lightning hit a power transformer at the edge of their yard. It then zapped Roy so hard in the left shoulder that it sent his body flying. A month later, his wife was struck while hanging laundry out to dry in their backyard, but she also survived. In April of 1972, Roy was struck at work. It was lightly raining out, but Roy was safely inside a guardhouse on top of Loft Mountain, checking in visitors' cars as they entered the campground in that part of the park. A bolt of lightning came down from the sky and completely fried a fuse box inside the station. According to the Washington Post, Roy told a reporter, quote, "The fire was bouncing around inside the station, and when my ears stopped ringing, I heard something sizzling. It was my hair on fire," end quote. Thinking fast, Roy tried to shove his burning hair under the faucet in the guardhouse's sink, but his head wouldn't fit. He grabbed wads of paper towel instead and soaked them in the sink, and managed to put the fire out. Then he drove himself to Waynesboro Community Hospital. The Washington Post reported that Roy told the hospital staff that all he wanted to do was lead a good life.
Oh, that poor man.
I know, he's been through hell.
Oh.
The Washington Post article was picked up by other papers all over the country, and soon the world. Ross and Norris McWhirter, the editors of the Guinness Book of World Records, contacted Roy all the way from London, wanting to put him down as the only living man to have been struck by lightning 4 times. And with that, Roy made it into the 1972 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records. Now, I find it to be just horribly ironic that he would go on to beat his own record.
That's not something you want to do. That's not the kind of record you want to beat.
Not at all. And it's also around this time, according to grunge.com, that Roy began expressing concerns that some sort of malevolent force was out to get him. Understandably paranoid and afraid, he began taking precautions. He carried a jug of water with him at all times, just in case he needed to put himself out. He would also pull over in his truck at any sign of bad weather and lay down in the front seat until the rain or dark clouds moved on. He would do his best to avoid any sort of bad weather. And that's exactly what he tried to do on August 7th, 1973. Again, Roy was out in his truck on his regular park patrol when he spotted dark clouds. He gunned it and took off, driving around as long as he could, trying to outrun it. Roy reportedly claimed later on that the clouds seemed to be following him. Eventually, he felt fairly confident that he had outrun it, so he parked his truck and ventured out. This time, Roy claimed that he actually saw the bolt of lightning as it hit him in the left arm, traveled all the way down his left leg, and blew off his shoe. Then it jumped over to just below his right knee. Still conscious, Roy managed to drag himself over to his truck and grab his emergency water jug. He dumped it all over his head, which he realized was on fire yet again.
Jeez, this poor man.
This, by the way, was strike number 5. Roy decided enough was enough, and he was going to take even more precautions. The rumor that he attached lightning rods to all 4 posts of his bed is not true, though. But he did install thick-gauge copper wire lightning rods to all 4 corners of his trailer, which he sunk 7 feet into the ground. He also attached one to his TV antenna, his electric mixer, and to the 6 tallest trees on his property. Despite this, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that dark clouds literally seemed to follow him. Strike number 6 injured his ankle. It was strike number 7, though, that caused him the worst injuries, although he still managed to wrestle a trout from a bear at the same time. Yes, you heard that right. On June 25th, 1977, Roy was fishing in a freshwater pond. He said that all of a sudden he smelled sulfur and could feel the hair on his arm stand up, and he knew exactly what was going to happen. The lightning hit him directly in the top of the head, setting his hair on fire, and then it traveled down the trunk of his body, burning his chest and stomach. Internally, the lightning burned his digestive tract, and it caused hearing loss in one ear. But as Roy turned to grab his ever-present jug of water from his truck, a bear lumbered out of the brush and tried to swipe the trout, that was dangling from Roy's fishing line.
Oh, my God.
I know, this poor man. Now, I don't know how he had the presence of mind or the physical strength to do this, but he grabbed a branch and literally beat the bear with it until it gave up and ran off.
Oh, my God. Oh, my gosh.
You can't make this stuff up. It could be that the bear was scared off by the smell of Roy's still burning hair, but Roy saved his fish.
Jeez.
I'd have mounted that one on the wall.
Yeah.
Throughout all the decades that Roy worked at the Shenandoah National Park, his superior, Superintendent R. Taylor Hoskins, never actually saw Roy get struck by lightning, but he did keep records of Roy's harrowing experiences. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, being known as the human conductor and human lightning rod made Roy a little bit famous. He made an appearance on the TV show To Tell the Truth, and that's incredible. He's been included on various lists over the years, dedicated to amazing survival stories, and he still holds the Guinness Book World Record for the person struck by lightning more recorded times than any other human. But when it came to his personal life, he did make comments about how there were numerous times when people avoided him out of fear. So, what is it about Roy Sullivan that seemed to attract lightning? Was it just bad luck? Or was it a combination of his job and his location? Unfortunately, there aren't any real answers to those questions. Roy Sullivan passed away on September 28, 1983, at the ripe old age of 71. His death was not caused by lightning.
Wow. That poor man.
Yeah, he'd been through hell and back.
I mean, it's amazing, but I can't imagine. I'd be terrified to leave my house, but even being in your house, he was still struck when he was inside places.
Yeah, getting hit by lightning is frightening enough. But to be out fishing and then get struck by lightning and then have a bear come out of the woods only to try to take your fish.
I know.
And then you beat it off with a stick.
I know.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
He's one hell of a guy.
He was, yeah.
They don't make him like that anymore.
No, that is an amazing story. And it is kind of sad that he felt like people avoided him. And I'm sure they did,
Well, yeah, I imagine they did a bit because they fear the unknown.
Right. Well, I'm sure he did too every time he stepped outside of his house.
I'm wondering if being hit by lightning so many times kind of makes you a conductor in some way.
Yeah, like it would make it more likely because it had happened so many times.
Perhaps so.
Maybe, I don't know. Well, anyway, if all you wanderers would like to know more, you can always check out our sources in our show notes. Again, there was a lot that I didn't put into my story about Kryptos and the Zimmerman telegram. And there's also more sources on Mr. Roy Sullivan.
So, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode, Beth.
I think so.
Join us next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.